They say you never really know a person, but I never thought that person would be me. It was all supposed to be a surprise. His 60th birthday. The cake, the guests, the speeches. I'd arranged everything with obsessive precision, envisioning his reaction when he saw friends, family, and even his golf buddies from out of state. His face would light up, laughter bouncing off the walls, filling the house like it used to before our marriage became a stifling silence. I'd spent years playing the role of the dutiful wife, standing by his side through every trial. Until I discovered the messages.
They weren't blatant, he wasn't a fool.
But the signs were there in the way he'd brush off my questions, the way he'd slip away after dinner with his phone in hand.
And then, of course, there was her. Her name is Susan.
A nurse at the clinic where he goes for checkups, with that kind of smile that lingers a little too long. For months, I kept my suspicions to myself, trying to ignore the truth clawing at me every night. But on the eve of his birthday, when I found a text from her with the words, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Hope she won't mind the surprise," I knew it wasn't just a harmless friendship.
So I planned.
In a way, you could say that his party was for me. The big day came, and as the guests gathered, I glanced over at him, oblivious in his joy. I could practically feel the air shift when she arrived, dressed a little too warmly for someone he'd introduced as a casual acquaintance from the clinic. The awkward glances and the way he turned pale as she entered was all the proof I needed. Halfway through the evening, I took the microphone to give my speech. I watched his face change as I began recounting memories of our marriage, our life together, the ups and downs. My voice cracked just enough to make the guests lean in, sensing something they couldn't quite put their finger on. But it was when I said, and in the spirit of honesty, "It's only fair we all know the truth," that his face truly turned ashen. I walked over to Susan, handed her the microphone, and simply said, "I think you should be the one to finish my story."
The room stilled.
She was frozen, trapped in the gaze of every single person in the room. She stammered something, casting desperate glances at him. My husband, no, the man who'd once been my husband, didn't move. Without another word, I walked out, leaving them both to face the reality of what they'd done, alone in a room that would never look at them the same way. It wasn't the clean revenge people dream of, but it was mine that I didn't expect anything after that night. Really, I thought it was done. I had exposed him, left him standing there like a fool in front of everyone he cared about. I wanted it to be over.
But it wasn't.
The days afterward were tense and bitter. He tried calling me, leaving long voicemails alternating between rage and pleading. I deleted each one, not caring to hear his explanations or apologies. I stayed at my sister's place, convincing myself I was done with him, with them both. I even started seeing a lawyer to discuss divorce. Then, a week later, there was a knock on my sister's door.
It was him.
He looked ragged, disheveled in a way I'd never seen. He'd always been so careful with his appearance, so meticulous. Now, standing on her doorstep, he looked years older, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. My sister wasn't home, and maybe that's why I did what I did, opened the door just enough to hear him out. "You've said enough," I told him, starting to close it, but he placed his hand on the doorframe.
"Please," he whispered.
"Just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat across from each other in the dim light of the living room, the weight of all those years between us like a wall I couldn't get past. He told me he was sorry, that he had been lost and didn't know why he did what he did. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, his touch now a repulsive reminder of betrayal. "Why are you really here?" I asked him, my voice cold. His face softened, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But whatever pity I felt vanished when he said, "Susan's gone. She hasn't shown up at work, and her phone's disconnected.
No one's heard from her." I felt a chill creep over me.
I met his eyes, unsure whether to believe him or if this was some sick way of trying to guilt me back. "And what's that got to do with me?" I replied icily. She told me she thought someone was following her." His voice cracked, his eyes darting around the room as if he feared something lurking in the shadows. "She said it started the day after the party. Every night, someone's been parked outside her apartment. She was scared and now she's gone. The idea of her being scared should have thrilled me, I guess. A bit of karma for everything she'd taken from me. But looking at him, the fear etched into his face, I felt something dark coil around my heart. This wasn't just guilt, he was genuinely terrified. And in that moment, I realized that I was too. "If she's missing, go to the police," I told him, standing up. He grabbed my wrist.
"Don't you get it?
I think someone knows." Knows about the affair, knows about the party. They're coming after us. I pulled away, backing toward the door, my hand on the doorknob. I don't know who you think that someone is, but I'm not afraid. Not anymore. As I closed the door behind him, his last words echoed in my mind. They'll come for you too. That night, I lay awake, his words rattling in my mind like a sinister echo. They'll come for you too. I tried to dismiss it. This was his guilt talking, his desperation to pull me back into his orbit. But something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. And the thought of her, of Susan vanishing without a trace, played on repeat, the gaps in my mind filling in with images of her scared, her perfect smile twisted in fear. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just nerves. But as I reached for my phone to check my messages, I noticed it, a new text from an unknown number. Pretty thing you did at the party. Let's see if you're brave enough for what's next. A shiver slid down my spine. I stared at the words, my pulse roaring in my ears. My mind raced to explain it, some prank, some mistake. But I knew better. Someone was watching, playing a game that I didn't understand. Without thinking, I tried to call the number, but it went straight to voicemail. A robotic voice simply said, "Mailbox is full." I dropped my phone, my mind spiraling. Maybe it was a coincidence. Or maybe someone had seen what happened at the party. Could it have been one of our friends, some sick twist on revenge? Or maybe it was one of his colleagues. Some of them knew Susan after all, and a few had even been there, exchanging glances when she arrived. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like a pair of eyes were always just out of sight. But I tried to go on with my day, repeating to myself that this was nothing more than paranoia. That night, though, as I walked back to my sister's place after running some errands, I felt a presence behind me. At first, I told myself it was nothing. But as I crossed the empty parking lot, I felt footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped. My heartbeat pounded against my chest, and I picked up my pace, practically running to the door. I fumbled with my keys, slipping them twice before finally unlocking it and slamming it shut behind me, my breath coming in shallow gasps. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak in the house, every shadow cast by the streetlight outside seemed to taunt me. And in the depths of that sleepless night, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Whoever this was, they wanted me scared. They wanted me cornered. And, heaven help me, they were succeeding. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the police. I told them about the texts, the strange footsteps, and the sense of being followed. They took notes, nodded with the usual detachment, and promised to look into it. But as I left the station, I felt no safer. I was just another case file, a suspicious wife with a missing lover caught up in something none of us could escape. But as I walked back to my car, I spotted him, my husband, sitting in his car across the street, his eyes wide and haunted. He was watching me, tracking my every move. And in that instant, I felt it. This wasn't over. Whoever was out there was closer than I thought. And maybe, just maybe, my husband and I weren't each other's enemies anymore. The realization hit me with a sickening clarity. Whoever was doing this wanted us both scared, wanted us on edge. They were forcing us together, weaving a trap we couldn't see. I wasn't ready to reach out to him, not after everything. But as the days passed, the messages grew darker, more insistent. Photos sent to my phone of me at the grocery store, outside the police station, even through the curtains of my sister's living room, taken from somewhere outside. Each one was accompanied by chilling messages. "You're not alone. Do you really think you're safe?" I didn't tell my sister. I couldn't drag her into this nightmare. But every moment, I felt my paranoia growing, twisting into something unbearable. By the end of the week, I gave in. I dialed his number. "Meet me. The old park by the lake," I told him, my voice hollow. No one else. He didn't argue, didn't ask why. And that silence told me he was just as desperate, just as terrified. The night was thick with fog, settling over the lake like a blanket, muffling everything. I spotted him standing alone on the pier, his face drawn, shoulders slumped. In the dim light, he looked like a shadow of the man I'd once known. "Why did you ask me here?" he said, barely meeting my gaze. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Because we don't have a choice anymore. Someone's targeting us. They know everything. It's only a matter of time before they do more than scare us." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around. "I thought it was you at first," he admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I thought you were the one playing these games, trying to get back at me." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed across the water. If I'd wanted revenge, I'd have done something a lot quicker than this. A silence fell between us, the weight of our broken trust and all the secrets that had driven us to this point hanging heavy in the air. He turned to face me, his expression softening. I don't know how it came to this. How we ended up like this. But I was done with confessions, with apologies that couldn't fix what had already shattered. What matters is figuring out who's behind this, I said, my voice hard.
Someone knows.
And they're not going to stop until. Before I could finish, a loud rustling sounded from the trees. We froze, the air charged with tension. A figure stepped out of the shadows, their face obscured by a hood, hands gloved, holding something in their grasp, a phone. Our phones buzzed in unison. Another message. I looked down to see a single line on the screen. Happy birthday to you both. Then the figure raised the phone, pressing a button, and the flash went off, capturing our terrified faces as we stood there helpless. Who are you? I demanded, my voice trembling, half hoping they'd reveal themselves, half praying they wouldn't. The figure said nothing, just stood there, the flash blinding us again and again, like mocking laughter. Then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, they turned and vanished into the mist.
We didn't chase them.
What would have been the point? They'd already won. They had our lives, our secrets, captured in those flashes, and we'd be looking over our shoulders forever, wondering who was watching, who was waiting. As he and I stood there, the fog curling around us, the full weight of our mistakes sank in. We were bound now, bound by secrets we could never undo, by a faceless shadow that would never let us go. We'd wanted to destroy each other, and instead, we'd handed the power to someone else. There was no redemption here, no fresh start. Only the certainty that for the rest of our lives, someone somewhere would be watching.